My name is Dominic, and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm finally presenting a video I've been wanting to do for some time. This is what I'm calling a mid-year check-in. I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite books I've read so far this year, a couple books I'm currently reading that are really great that I want to showcase, and then at the back end of this video, I might spend a minute or two talking about some of my goals or hopes for the rest of the year on the channel. Before we jump in though, I do want to shout out the channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up any of your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything there you like, you can use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's probably the best way to support the channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with our mid-year check-in. First up today, I want to talk about a couple books that I've read since the beginning of the year that I can recommend, that I enjoyed for one reason or another. And to kick off that list, we're going to be looking at the 52 Omnibus from DC Comics. This was a book I read toward the beginning of the calendar year of 2024, and I absolutely loved it. And while I did do a full review on my channel after reading it, I have really had this book just stay with me and in my thoughts since then, and I feel like I appreciate it even more with some distance. For those that maybe don't know, this is kind of an event omnibus, or kind of an event series. It takes place sometime after the events of Infinite Crisis, during a year where the main trio of superheroes in the DC Universe, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, are all kind of out of the superhero scene for one reason or another. In that year they are away. What happens to the DC Universe? Well, in the pages of 52 we get to find out. This series was released weekly for one full calendar year. That's right, we're looking at 52 individual issues here that were released every single week. What's even cooler than that is that each of the issues in this series that was released weekly is also set within the DC Universe for 1 week of time, and you just go through the calendar together. I thought this was such a groundbreaking and novel approach. It really added this cool kind of time element to this story, and I really dug it. We have a lot of great stories in here from characters like Black Adam, Booster Gold, The Question, The Elongated Man, Animal Man, and so many more. Steel, John Henry Irons, wow, there's just so many great different point of view characters throughout this series, and this whole book was a real treat. Now, I do think just about anyone can pick this off the shelf and enjoy it. However, I would highly recommend reading Infinite Crisis first, as it really does set up some of the central conflicts and just kind of, it sets the scene for where DC is at the time of this series quite well. This book also does probably benefit you if you have a functional understanding of a lot of these DC characters already, but I don't think it's absolutely required. Like I said, I think anyone can pick up this series and kind of just jump right in. It will fill in the gaps you need, I think, for the most part. But yeah, very fun reading here. This is definitely a bigger omnibus, but I had an absolute blast making my way through. In fact, it is one of my favorite DC event omnibuses I have on my shelf. Anyway, really great book, one of my favorites so far in 2024. Next up on my mid-year check-in, another book I've really loved reading this year. I actually finished this not too long ago. Swamp Thing by Scott Snyder and Charles Soule. This is the New 52 era omnibus, and wow, this was a real treat. You got not only Scott Snyder's run, but yes, also Charles Soule's run on the New 52 Swamp Thing title, completing, that entire run for that era. Why I think this is so cool is that both of the runs are fairly different than one another, and you have them back to back. You start with Scott Snyder's era, which really feels kind of like a body horror sort of book set in the DC universe, and then you transition over to Charles Soule, which to me feels more like a traditional Swamp Thing run in many ways. We deal with some fantastical science fiction kind of concepts, definitely that dark fantasy edge to it, deeply philosophical, but both sides of this book both read fantastically. I really did enjoy it. Like I said, it's pretty different, even tonally, what they're going for. The first half, again, that kind of body horror, and I would also mix it with kind of a blockbuster thriller aspect to it. Really fast-paced, really just edge of your seat. Some incredible crossover issues with Animal Man. We have a big event called the Rot World that's sort of the culmination of Scott Snyder's time on the book. And then we kick over to Charles Soule. And for me, actually getting to read this year was a real blast. I mentioned it in the review, but this was a series that I was following right when it came out at the beginning of the New 52. I read maybe the first 6 or 7 issues or so of this run, and then I basically fell off of it, and I never went back to it until I had an opportunity to get this collection. And getting to reread those early issues and then finally finish out that run and Charles Soule's run, I was just so hooked. I really wish I almost kept up with this at the time, but it did make for an absolute great read for me here in 2024. I love how this omnibus is put together as well. I think DC really knocked it out of the park. I am a fan of the Swamp Thing. I've enjoyed runs by Alan Moore and some of the original stuff by Len Wein. This is probably the third run I've really gotten to. There's definitely some notable gaps in my Swamp Thing reading history, but this is a character I am certainly a fan of. In this New 52 era, I really don't think should be slept on. I know it has its fans, but I think it definitely deserves a greater readership. It is a real treat. I think in particular the Charles Soule era of this book is probably my favorite, which is surprising to me. I do like Charles Soule, but Scott Snyder is just one of my number one writers. But anyway, really great book. I had so much fun with it so far. Had to showcase for this video. Okay, next up, and kicking it over to the Marvel side of the fence, this is Hellions by Zeb Wells. I have the entire run here in this oversized hardcover edition. For those that don't know, Hellions is a kind of anti-hero, almost villain-based rogue team book within that kind of greater X-Men franchise. This is all taking place during that House of X, Powers of 10 inspired Krakoa era for all the X books. It's a really interesting time for this whole franchise. Essentially, the mutants have their own island nation state known as Krakoa. They're becoming kind of a world superpower. They have all of these other things going on that really set them apart and give them kind of a superiority they've never really had, and with that comes a lot of conflict. One of the things that happens on this island is that we have a ton of mutants that are just kind of inherently dangerous, have a darker nature, and no one's really sure what to do with them, and in comes Mr. Sinister, one of the members of the ruling council of this nation of Krakoa, and he says, let me have them as a team. You know, I can do these kind of black ops, kind of darker missions with them. We can vent some of their frustrations and darker nature, and we can do it in a constructive way. And while no one really trusts Mr. Sinister, they kind of give him the stamp of approval, and in comes this team, the Hellions. One of my favorite characters, Havoc, is in it, and he's almost misplaced on this team, but I feel like his role here is really a fascinating one. We also have Quanon, the kind of body of Psylocke from that whole thing with Betsy Braddock. Anyway, she's also on the team, and along with a really interesting mix of other characters, but this was just a ton of fun. The art throughout it is gorgeous. It has a lot of tongue-in-cheek and dark humor throughout it. Great action sequences. It's an X-Men book that's a little bit darker, maybe a tad more explicit. I think it's definitely meant for a little bit more mature audiences. I had a blast going through it. There were some jokes in here that really just made me laugh out loud. Like I said, the art was fun. I thought the characters were really fascinating. Between long-term favorites of mine and characters that were completely new to me, this team book just really worked. I know it's had its accolades and a lot of people liked it from this era, but I still think there's a broader audience that hasn't yet discovered this team book. And for people that like books like Suicide Squad or Secret Six over at DC Comics, this is kind of in that same wheelhouse. You know, you have that kind of rogue-based team. I guess for Marvel, like the Thunderbolts is another team quite like this. But yeah, this is more mutant X-Men base. I really enjoyed it, and overall, just a fun time. Definitely one of my favorites so far this year. Next up for our mid-year check-in, the Venomnibus by Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman. This is really one of my contenders for Book of the Year 2024. We'll see if anything just unseats it before the end of the year, but this one really blew me away. This is a run that I've had recommended to me for years at this point, pretty much since it was coming out. I had read The King in Black, which is kind of the event that is the culmination of this entire run. I read that as a standalone and really enjoyed it, but reading it in context of the greater run, the whole experience just really blew me away. This is one of my favorite single omnibuses in my collection, and this run just, it has so much going for it. It is clear from the first page that this is such a passion project for the writer Donny Cates, and you definitely get that when you read his introduction presented at the beginning of this book as well. When you think of Venom, you might think over-the-top, grotesque, violent monster, but what we find in this run, in addition to all those things, is a whole lot of heart, some father-son dynamics, some stories of redemption, and just, this idea that we all belong, that we all have a place, that we're in it together, and just so much hope. The fact that Donny Cates infused the Venom mythos and lore with all of these great character-driven just arcs and themes and everything, it's just so rich. Absolutely adore this book. And I know I've spoken about it a couple times on the channel already, but it's hard to think about my year reading in 2024 without bringing up this book. If you have never read Venom by Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman, please do yourself a favor and consider checking it out. I also think that this could be read without reading any prior books. I think it's great for new readers. I think it'll fill you in on what you need. It does so much of the lore building for this run within the run itself. Yes, there are great Easter eggs and kind of payoffs from other runs and histories for this character and characters like Spider-Man, but I think you can absolutely enjoy it by itself. Really a stellar reading experience. And hey, if you're enjoying this video and you've yet to subscribe to the channel, I would just like to invite you to do so. I'm always doing themed videos like this, along with comic book reviews, unboxings, hauls, and more. Thank you for considering. Now let's keep this going. Next, we're back to the world of DC Comics with one of their Black Label titles, Aquaman Andromeda by Ram V and Christian Ward. To me, this was one of my premier favorites coming out of Black Label that I had a chance to read this year. This was kind of a psychological horror cosmic thriller that is just loosely an Aquaman story. In fact, the incarnation we get of Aquaman is this kind of like haunting undersea creature almost. He has like coral and kind of algae stuff like growing out of him, and his hair is just flowing. He almost looks like a really creepy like sea creature more than a man. It's kind of hard to explain, but the cover obviously did it justice. Really great character model here. This really feels like, again, like a sci-fi cosmic horror thriller, deeply psychological. You basically follow a team of explorers, some kind of mercenary characters. They try to go in a submersible to basically find something they believe crash landed, possibly from outer space, deep in the ocean. As they go down in their submarine, they encounter the likes of Aquaman and some other more villainous and nefarious characters, but they're all trying to make their way to this object at the bottom of the sea. As they get closer, though, some weird happenings begin to occur, and the crew begin to kind of question their own motives, each other, and things really start to unravel rather swiftly. I won't go into any spoilers here, but this was an absolute treat for someone like me who loves the kind of psychological horror thriller genre. You add in some sci-fi elements like this did, and just, chef's kiss. This was such a fun read. The art from Christian Ward was also just otherworldly, surreal, and absolutely engrossing. Ram V has a kind of poetic style to his prose that had me engrossed from the first page, and this was just one heck of a ride. Another recent read for me was Spider-Man by Chip Zdarsky, the Omnibus. This is definitely going to be on my highlight reel for this year, simply because I love Spider-Man, and this was the most fun I've had reading a Spider-Man Omnibus in recent memory. And again, that's coming as a Spider-Man fan who's had a lot of fun with Spider-Man Omnibuses, and yet this is kind of a cut above. For me, this Omnibus gives us so much for one price point here. We not only have the entire Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man run from Zdarsky included, but after we also have basically two standalone graphic novels in the form of Spider-Man Life Story and Spider-Man Spider's Shadow. All three of these different kind of Spider-Man works are all collected here, and they all really bring something to the table. In this, we also have a good dollop of Zdarsky's trademark humor, and yet deeply felt heart and character depth that I've come to know and love with a lot of his writings. The art we get throughout this book as well is absolutely phenomenal. We have a good handful of artists. One of my favorites is during Spider-Man Life Story. We have the return of Mark Bagley, one of the most premier Spider-Man artists artists of all time, probably my personal favorite Spider-Man artist. Really, really incredible stuff here. If you've never read Life Story, which I personally think is probably the pinnacle of this collection, it essentially has a kind of alternate universe Spider-Man story where what if Spider-Man, bitten in the 60s, basically was allowed to age up, and what if all of the main storylines we got in whatever era or decade of Spider-Man comics we read, what if they were kind of thrown together into a medley, remixed, and then basically addressed issue to issue. What I mean by that is this is like a 6-issue miniseries, and issue 1 takes place during the 60s, issue 2 during the 70s, and so on into like the 2010s. For long-term fans of Spider-Man, this is just an absolute masterpiece, and for someone just checking out Spider-Man, this is really a highlight reel of some of the best and brightest this character can give, and this is just one aspect of this incredible omnibus. Really a memorable experience. Okay, and now we're going to start transitioning into a couple books I am actively or currently reading that I'm really enjoying as well, that I think are also going to be on my best of list for this year. But more than that, as part of this mid-year check-in, I thought it'd be fun to just look at some of the stuff I'm actively reading, not just some of the things I've already finished and enjoyed so far this year. To that end, we have the Miles Morales Spider-Man Omnibus by Saladin Ahmed. This is effectively the Miles Morales Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 3. This picks up after the end of the Bendis era on Miles Morales, and this is really great. You know, I heard kind of mixed reviews about this run, but everything I've read so far has been amazing. I love what another writer brings to this character. It feels absolutely and authentically Miles Morales, and yet it has a different feel. It has a different tone. He stresses different themes, and he develops the character in new ways. I'd really like to see the character of Miles maturing and really stepping into his own in a new way. Honestly, this is one of the more fresh Spider-Man books I've seen in recent years. The art we get throughout it so far that I've read has been beautiful, absolutely just gripping, and I really like it. You know, some of the early story arcs as well, some of the cameo characters we get, like you've seen here, like Rhino and Captain America, it's just really fun. You know, this book is squarely set in the Marvel Universe, and it absolutely takes full advantage of that. I think also just seeing the character of Miles get a little bit older, I think he's maybe an upperclassman in high school now, you can see him dealing with more complex situations, juggling relational stuff along with things with his parents, and of course all of his villains and some of his other kind of superheroed peers and allies. It's just really fun to see everything going on in his world, and I'm so happy we got another Miles Morales omnibus, to be honest with you. When I complete this run, I do plan to do a full review on this title, but in the meantime, has anyone read Saladin Ahmed's Miles Morales stuff? If so, what did you think? Would love to get more feedback on it in the comments below. Another book I'm actively reading at the time of this recording is Batman and Robin Eternal, the Omnibus edition from DC Comics. This is another really fun read that I hope to review once I complete it. I did get this book donated from a friend of the channel. Thanks again so much. I mentioned it in the haul video, but this book is honestly really fun. This is essentially a Bat family-based book, meaning that we get a lot more of Batman's allies leading the way rather than Batman himself. Yes, he makes appearances throughout this book, particularly with the usage of flashbacks, but this is really Robin's show, and that's Robin's plural. We have so many of the different kind of Bat proteges here, like Dick Grayson, we got Red Hood, we got Tim Drake, we have some of the characters like Spoiler and Orphan, and Batgirl makes some appearances, and there's even more than that. It's honestly kind of mind-boggling. But we have this kind of interesting conspiracy and mystery that goes all the way back to one of the earliest cases that Dick Grayson worked with Batman back when he was Robin, and it has ramifications up to the present day. And during this era when this takes place, somewhere in the New 52 after the events of Batman Endgame by Scott Snyder, for one reason or another, the Batman is kind of indisposed, and so the Robins and the rest of the allies kind of have to take matters into their own hands to figure out what is going on, and basically to save the day from evildoers as they are wont to do. This series was released weekly for about half a year, and it has a ton of writers and artists attached to it. I won't go into all of them here, but it has some heavy hitters like Scott Snyder and James Tynion IV, to name a few. And for anyone wondering, I don't believe you need to read Batman Eternal before enjoying this collection. However, having a functional understanding of a lot of Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's run on Batman and the New 52, particularly the story Endgame, as well as a loose grasp of what happened with Dick Grayson in the series Grayson when he went on to be a super spy, I think that groundwork is helpful to enjoy this collection. Next up is a current read that I feel like has been in my to-finish pile forever. This is a really fantastic book. I just find myself juggling so many books that I have to just really commit to finishing this one. This is Spider-Man 2099 by Peter David, Omnibus Volume 1. This collects the entirety of that Spider-Man 2099 90s comic series. Set in the dystopian Nueva York in the future, we have this genetically altered Spider-Man of the future, Miguel O'Hara, trying to topple a corrupt corporation and so many bad vigilantes in the process. This is a very fun book that feels almost in that kind of cyberpunk genre. This is really analogous to something like Batman Beyond, if you're a fan of that animated series or some of the comics or whatnot. But yeah, this is set in kind of the near future in the year 2099, and we have a decidedly different Spider-Man than Peter Parker. He's been kind of gene spliced with a spider. He does have certain spider abilities, but some that are very different from our classic Spider-Man variety. I really liked this. I liked seeing kind of the 90s interpretation of a dystopian future, and honestly, Miguel O'Hara is a kick-butt character. Peter David has a lot of humor throughout this run, but a lot of kind of grittiness too that I just really enjoyed. The characters, supporting cast, and villains are all super noteworthy and memorable. This omnibus also includes some great crossovers, and honestly, it's a really great collection. I'm still making my way through it as it is pretty sizable, but I do plan on reviewing this one as well once I finish reading. This is definitely a standout collection for me, and I know if I do have an opportunity to finish it by year's end, I am sure this is going to be in my top list for the end of the year. And this is one, because it's taken me so long to get through, I definitely mark it as something that feels 2024 for me. As it's been on my shelf, I've been slowly making my way through, and honestly, it's just been a part of my reading life this year. Another book I want to talk about that I've been currently reading and making my way through that I'm getting near the end of, or at least closer, is the Iron Fist and the Immortal Weapons omnibus from Marvel Comics. This is that Ed Brubaker Matt Fraction run on Iron Fist. We have some other creators, especially at the back end of this book, but this is one of the most premier and celebrated Iron Fist runs in the comic book franchise's history, and there's a really good reason for that. We start off largely with kind of learning about other Iron Fists within the mythos. We also find our current hero in Iron Fist, Danny Rand, really just trying to figure out who he is and what comes next for him in life. We have him get swept up in this kind of interdimensional martial arts tournament. Feels very Mortal Kombat in a way. We have a lot of kind of conspiracy and political happenings and game playing kind of over there in Kunlun. We have some cool kind of science fiction plot threads. We have some great appearances from some of the other heroes for hire. We have some good love interests for our favorite Iron Fist, and honestly some great artwork throughout. David Aja's art at the beginning of this arc too is one of my favorites, and honestly, as someone who's just recently become a fan of the Immortal Iron Fist, this has been an absolute blast to be making my way through. I do think that the Ed Brubaker heavy era and even the Matt Fraction stuff is maybe some of the best in this collection. I am in the back half of this book now, and it's still quite good, but it isn't grabbing me with as much tension and just oomph as maybe the first half of this book, but I am still really happy to have this omnibus. This was one I was hoping to pick up in 2023, didn't quite make it, and found myself saving up for it in early 2024. And since then, I've been making my way through. You know, I did read the Danny Rand Early Years omnibus early this year as well, but reading that and reading this, it's just been a very Iron Fist heavy year as well, and I couldn't be happier about it. It's been really fun to explore this character. Okay, and I think that's all the individual books I want to showcase on today's video. Between showing you things that really are my standout top reads so far for 2024, as well as some books I'm actively reading and greatly enjoying, I thought for the last minute or two of this video, I could talk about some of the things I hope to accomplish on this channel in the remaining months of 2024, or at least what some of my goals are. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but lately I've tried to do vertical live streaming here and there when I can, maybe once every other week or so. I've really enjoyed that. I know I've loved having a handful of you come out, comment, give those likes and just kind of be live with me. It's definitely something I've never really encountered before, and it's been a great chance to connect with all of you. I think going in toward the latter half of 2024, I'm hoping to get a better live stream set up. I might even try to do some talking head stuff, some horizontal live streaming as well. I'm not sure how that's going to go, but I am actively pursuing trying to get that set up. I know my tech is by no means super great, but even with what I have, I want to see what I can do just to make that connection point with all of you. I just think live streaming is something I do want to implement into the channel. Let me know in the comments though if that's something you would like to see or at least would be interested in. I would really love your feedback on that. So far those vertical live streams have gotten me pretty good reception, but again, I'd love to get your thoughts. Another thing on this channel I'd really like to do, I've seen it with some of my peers, I know I've always had it as a personal goal, is to really interview some comic book creators. I've had a chance to meet a few of them just in my local comic shops or at small scale conventions, but I've yet to really sit down and do any kind of formal interview or get any actual recording. I have discussed things with some of these comic book creators, and I'll sometimes add those tidbits to videos when I'm talking about them, but I haven't actually recorded a video with a comic book creator. I haven't set up an interview, but I really hope to do so on the channel before the year's end. That is a personal goal of mine. I may or may not have something in the works in the next couple weeks, so stay tuned for that, but that's definitely been actively on my list as well. I think beyond that, I also just want to improve what I've been doing these last couple years. I love still doing comic book reviews, and recently, this last year or so, I've loved making these comic book top 5, top 10, kind of more comic themed list videos. It's been a really great way to showcase multiple books. And as a fan of comic book YouTubers and as a fan of comic books in general, I do sometimes like videos where I can see a greater breadth of collections and things that are spoken to. So I hope you guys are enjoying those list videos as much as I am. I have had a blast making them. They are so much fun. In addition to that too, I also want to try to implement new segments or try to do better one-off videos here and there just to keep things fresh with the channel as well. I know one thing that's been very requested is a collection tour, and while my collection is by no means the largest here in this YouTube space, I still think it would be fun to showcase my collection, some of the things I have here, maybe highlight some of my favorites. It is my goal to try to get some kind of collection tour video or live before the year's end. And finally, my last goal here for 2024 that I'll share with all of you, this is actually one of my personal YouTube goals. Not sure if I'm going to make it, but it is what I've been pushing for, is to try to hit 10,000 subscribers on YouTube by the end of 2024. At the time of this recording, I have broken 7,000, which is already so humbling. I could never have done that without each and every one of you. But this is just a goal I've made to try to keep myself motivated. Honestly, finding this community has been such a joy these last couple years. You guys have blessed me so much. I'm really so thankful for everything that you guys do for this channel. But if you're enjoying it and want to see it continue to grow, please consider sharing these videos with friends who you think might enjoy them. Would love to get the word out that way. And that's really going to do it for this mid-year check-in. Thank you so much for taking this ride with me. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, your comment, and maybe check out another video on your way out. Thanks again. Have a good one.